One of the things I really enjoy about doing this project is finding things out about World War II that I never knew, things that haven't necessarily been made into movies or to TV shows yet. And one day, for some reason, it occurred to me that I'd never really seen Wales or any Welsh characters pop up in any of the big war movies. So I started researching Wales and the surrounding area and the role it played in World War II, and found out that the Luftwaffe repeatedly targeted Cardiff and neighbouring Bristol. Between 1940 and 1941, the Germans carried out over 20 air raids on the Welsh capital, and this was largely to stop ships coming out of the docks there. Over half these took place over the Easter of 1941, with large swathes of the city damaged and hundreds killed, but the docks remained in operation. The raids largely dried up after this, but there was a raid on 17th of May 1943, and it's believed that that was revenge for the success of the Dambusters raid. During that raid, in a little bit of a bizarre twist of fate, one of the German bombers misidentified the Irish Sea as the River Severn, which I guess is easily done, and ended up dropping its bombs over County Cork, which was in Ireland, which was neutral at the time. All of the airfields named in the episode are real. I didn't even try and pronounce them because I'm not Welsh and I didn't really want to try and appropriate the accent. I think in total there was somewhere in the region of 34 RAF airfields around Wales during the war, and there was a wide variety of use for them. Pengan Moors wasn't destroyed by an alien invader. It was quietly decommissioned in 1946. Sadly, there's no trace of it anymore because the city's expanded to surround it and it's been flattened, turned into shops and flats. I did have to take some liberties when I wrote the story and pushed the airfield a little further outside the city boundaries, because in reality, it was only a mile or two away at the time on low-lying ground and quite close to the coast. No high ground whatsoever. But hey, what's the point in being a writer if you can't switch things round? The station had quite a history. It was first established in 1905 for experimental airships, and it was the site of the first powered flight across the Bristol Channel. Up until the war, it was largely used for private flying before the RAF acquired it. And during the war, Pengan Moors was used as an emergency landing strip for damaged fighters to use when they were struggling to get back to their own home base after missions. In addition to this, there were fighters there that flew naval patrols all around the Welsh coastline, and aircraft were transported there from factories to be dismantled and then sent overseas in boxes, which might seem a little bit weird. Mainly Barracks is still the principal army base in the region today, and I included the Covenanter tanks because, frankly, I'd never heard of them. You watch war movies, and it tends to be the same old vehicles, largely Sherman tanks, but in reality, the British were continually upgrading their tanks from the start of the war right through to the finish. The Mark I cruiser was already in existence during the interwar years, and with war on the horizon, it was constantly being revised and redesigned. The Covenanter was the fifth version of the design, and it was rushed into production in 1939. Sadly, it was plagued with engine overheating, totally unsuitable for use in the desert, which is where most of the tanks were needed, and after 1,700 had been made, it was discontinued. The name of it, the Covenanter, comes from a Scottish religious sect during the 17th century, and the tank would die out as quickly as they did. It was too late to use in Dunkirk, and it was out of service before the invasion of Europe. And the tanks that followed it as it upgraded were a lot more famous, such as the Crusader, the Churchill, and the Cromwell. Cruisers all starting with C, strangely enough. The Bottom Pull Defiant had quite a similar history, and I guess if it proves anything, it's that I'm a sucker for an underdog or damaged goods. What it was essentially a Hawker Hurricane with the former armament stripped out, forward armament stripped out, and a machine gun turret bolted onto the back. That turret couldn't face around to the front, so unsurprisingly, what you were left with wasn't particularly effective in a dogfight. Eventually, it was relegated for coastal search and rescue patrols and night fighter duties, and when the Beaufighter and the Mosquito came along, it was got rid of altogether. I have got something of a soft spot for it because it was designed and constructed in my hometown in Wolverhampton. Trust the Midlands to produce one of the least effective weapons of World War II, eh? Part of the inspiration for this channel, this project, is that when I was a kid, we'd go on a holiday, family holiday to Cornwall every year, and on the way down there, I'd stop off in the shops and the newsagents and binge on Airfix models and Commando comics from the newsagents. I did make a couple of Defiants, but to be honest, I made a lot more Stukas and Spitfires, which I used to dogfight with. If you've never read a Commando comic, you should try and track one down. They're hard to describe. They were little black and white comic books with war stories designed for kids, sort of sanitized with all the blood and guts taken out. But the storylines were pretty ridiculous. A standard storyline would involve a character who had either been cowardly or had covered up for somebody else's cowardice and he'd been excluded from his unit. And then there'd be a nasty enemy ambush, and he'd end up saving his whole unit from them and finding redemption. But they also like to throw ghost stories in there, alien stories, and they were a big fan of the twin brothers separated at birth and suddenly finding themselves dogfighting on opposite sides of the channel. In terms of the UFO, Sean's gone and nailed it again. As usual, my brief for him was completely vague and useless, and he managed to turn it around into something really memorable. I'd asked him to think about the imagery for this a while back because I wanted to take one of the pictures and use it in the channel trailer. What he came up with had the operator actually sort of flying up in the sky alongside it, like some sort of Marvel superhero, and it's iconic to look at, really memorable, but it wasn't quite what I was going for. So by the time we came around to the episode, we had a discussion. I'd asked him to sort of tone down the operator side a little bit. But one of the things I wanted to do was keep the relationship between the operator, the ship, and the suit itself quite vague. I didn't really want it to be clear who the dominant power in the relationship was. You've clearly got the chap on the ground who's controlling the ship, but his relationship to the suit is deliberately unclear, and how the inclusion of a human host at the end of the story is going to develop in the future, hint, hint, is also unclear. The shot that Sean came up with for the attack on the guns is one of my favourite ones he's done so far. One of my inspirations, favourite novels, is War of the Worlds, and that's what I was going for. And I think he definitely does that justice with this shot. If you've finally twigged onto my wavelength yet and figured out what a nerd I am, you may well have noticed that HMS Holder has never been a ship in the Royal Navy. It is instead a tribute to one of the Midlands' most famous sons, Noddy Holder, the lead singer of Slade. If you're going to stick with the channel, you have to brace yourself for the fact that I'm going to include pointless Midlands cameos in the future all over the place, because I'm sad like that. Anyway, I hope you're sticking with us. I hope you feel that the channel's developed, and if you have any feedback or any criticism, share it with me and I'll try and improve on it. But thanks again.